Alien general sees human soldiers, instantly quits his job, and goes to Earth. General Svarok had seen many battles in his long career as a leader in the Vragoth Empire. His people, the Vragoth, were one of the most advanced and powerful species in the galaxy. They had conquered countless worlds, defeated stronger enemies, and imposed their rule across vast stretches of space. They were an empire built on strength, technology, and fear. Svarok was one of their finest generals, and for years he had commanded battles that would leave entire planets in ruins. Yet, despite all their victories, there was something that always bothered him. There was something about the humans that he couldn't quite understand. He had heard rumors, stories, and reports about the human race. They were primitive, at least by Vragoth standards. Their technology was nothing compared to the Vragoth's. They had no fleet of warships that could rival the might of the Vragoth fleet. And yet, time and time again, humans had managed to defy the odds. It was in one of these reports that Svarok first heard of the human soldiers. They were fighting a war on a small planet in a distant system, defending their colony against an enemy species far stronger than them. The report described a group of human soldiers who, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a determination that was nearly impossible to understand. They did not retreat, and they did not surrender. They fought to the last man, standing their ground until the very end. Intrigued, Svarok ordered his ship to take him to that very planet. He wanted to see these humans for himself. He wanted to understand what it was that made them so different. And so he arrived on the planet, observing from a distance as the battle raged on below. From the vantage point of his ship, Svarok watched as human soldiers, clad in simple armor and wielding primitive weapons, fought against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The enemy, a vicious species called the Xiren, had superior numbers and advanced weaponry. They had already overrun several of the human colonies and were now making their final push to take this one as well. But what Svarok saw next shocked him. The human soldiers were not retreating. They were not running in fear. Instead, they fought with everything they had, pushing forward even when their ranks were thinning. Svarok had seen many battles, but he had never seen a species fight like this before. They were not fighting for glory or for power. They were fighting for something more. It was something Svarok couldn't quite grasp, something he had never seen in any other species. As the battle went on, Svarok's focus shifted to one particular human soldier. He was a captain named Marcus Kane, and he was leading the defense of a critical position. Svarok watched as Captain Kane led his troops with calm determination, organizing them in the face of overwhelming odds. He directed fire, gave orders, and even took down a Xiren warlord with his bare hands. The sight of it was almost surreal. Despite all the technological advantages of the Xiren, this single human soldier was able to turn the tide of battle with sheer willpower. Svarok couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had always been taught that the strength of a species came from its technology, its ability to overpower others with superior weapons and force. But here were humans, with their simple tools and their basic technology, fighting in a way that defied all logic. They were not fighting to win in the traditional sense. They were fighting to survive, and in doing so they had unlocked something far more powerful than advanced weaponry. The more Svarok watched, the more fascinated he became. He had seen countless species fall to the might of the Vragoth. He had seen entire civilizations crumble under the weight of his empire. And yet these humans, they were different. They were willing to fight and die for each other, even when all hope seemed lost. They fought not because they had to, but because they chose to. It was a mentality Svarok had never encountered before. As the battle reached its climax, Captain Kane and his soldiers managed to hold the line, pushing the Xiren back. The humans had won, but not without great cost. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of both human and Xiren soldiers, and the survivors were left battered and broken. But there was something in the way the humans carried themselves that left a lasting impression on Svarok. They did not mourn their losses with despair. They did not retreat in defeat. They simply kept moving forward, determined to rebuild and defend what was theirs. It was then that Svarok realized something. Despite all the power and technology of the Vragoth Empire, there was something the humans possessed that his people did not. It was their spirit. It was their unyielding will to fight, to survive, and to protect what they held dear. It was something that couldn't be quantified or measured with weapons or technology. It was a force more powerful than anything Svarok had ever encountered. As Svarog watched the humans celebrate their victory, he made a decision. He would leave the Vragoth Empire behind. He would go to Earth. He would experience this human spirit firsthand. He would learn what made these humans so strong. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would find something he had been searching for all his life, something that even the Vragoth Empire could not give him. With that thought, Svarog turned to his ship's controls, preparing to leave the battlefield and head toward Earth. The journey would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Svarog felt a sense of hope. He was not sure what he would find on Earth, but he knew one thing for certain. It was time to leave behind the empire of domination and learn from the species that had shown him what true strength really meant. After Svarog's decision to leave the Vragoth Empire, the journey to Earth was one of uncertainty. The ship he had stolen was a small, experimental model, fast, but not equipped for long-term travel. He had no idea what awaited him on Earth, or if he would even make it there. His mind constantly replayed the scenes he had witnessed on the human colony, the bravery, the tenacity, the unyielding spirit of the human soldiers. He couldn't stop thinking about Captain Marcus Kane. There was something in that human soldier's eyes, something that made Svarog wonder if there was more to strength than he had ever realized. As the days passed in the vast emptiness of space, Svarog found himself questioning everything he had known. The Vragoth Empire, with all its power and technology, felt empty now. He had been raised to believe that strength came from control, from ruling over others, from being feared. But the humans had shown him that true strength came from something deeper, something beyond technology. It was a spirit, an indomitable will to fight for what they believed in, no matter the odds. Svarog thought back to his own people. The Vragoth were powerful, but they lacked the unity and heart that humans seemed to possess. They fought for power, for conquest, for dominance. But humans fought for each other, for their families, for their survival. It was a concept that Svarog could not fully understand, yet it fascinated him. How could a species so primitive in terms of technology be so powerful in their spirit? The ship hummed softly as it moved through space, and Svarog couldn't help but wonder what kind of world he would find on Earth. Would the humans accept him, or would they see him as just another invader? He had no answers, but his desire to learn more about them only grew stronger. He had to find out. The journey, however, was not as smooth as he had hoped. His ship was not built for deep space travel, and the strain of the long journey started to show. The fuel levels were low, and there were several systems on the ship that began to malfunction. But Svarog pressed on, determined to reach Earth. He knew the Vragoth would eventually track him down, but he was willing to risk everything for the chance to understand humanity. Days turned into weeks, and as Svarog's ship neared Earth's atmosphere, he prepared for the landing. The ship's systems were failing, and the descent was far from smooth. Svarog had piloted many ships in his time, but nothing compared to the challenges of landing an unfamiliar vessel under these conditions. As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the heat shield began to glow brightly, and Svarog's hands tightened on the controls. The ship rattled violently, the pressure outside growing intense. He braced himself as the ship broke through the clouds, the noise of the atmosphere's resistance deafening in the cockpit. He had no clear destination, no clear plan, just the burning desire to meet the humans who had left such an impression on him. The ship started to fall, and Svarog realized he had no control over the landing. The ground rushed up to meet him, and with a loud crash, the ship hit the Earth's surface. When Svarog finally opened his eyes, he was surrounded by smoke and debris. The ship had crash-landed in a dense forest, far from any city. He could see the trees shaking from the impact, and a deep sense of disorientation set in. His ship was severely damaged, and the engine was completely offline. He was stranded, and the Vragoth fleet would likely be searching for him soon. But he had no choice now. He needed to see this planet to meet the humans who had captured his mind and soul. Svarog stepped out of the wreckage, feeling the cool Earth air for the first time. The ground beneath his feet was solid and real, not the cold, metallic surfaces of his home world. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the sounds of distant birds and rustling leaves. He surveyed the area, his mind racing. He had no idea where he was, but he knew he had to move quickly. The longer he stayed here, the more likely it was that someone or something would find him. He walked for hours through the dense forest, his alien eyes adjusting to the Earth's dim light. The trees towered above him, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The smell of the earth was unlike anything he had ever experienced, fresh, earthy, alive. For the first time in his life, Svarog felt a sense of peace. This planet, this place, felt different from the cold, mechanical existence he had known. It was alive, vibrant, and full of possibilities. Eventually, he stumbled upon a small human settlement. It was nothing more than a group of houses surrounded by fields, but to Svarog, it felt like a world away from the war-torn galaxy he had left behind. He approached cautiously, staying in the shadows, unsure of how the humans would react to his presence. He had no idea how they would respond to an alien, especially one who had once been part of an empire that sought to conquer their kind. As he neared the settlement, he saw a group of humans working in the fields. They were simple farmers, harvesting crops under the warm sun. They looked peaceful, content, and Svarog couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for them. They were so different from the Vragath, who had always viewed themselves as the pinnacle of existence. These humans didn't have vast armies or advanced technology, but they had something far more powerful, a connection to the land, to each other, and to the world around them. One of the farmers, an older man with graying hair, looked up and saw Svarog standing at the edge of the field. For a moment there was silence. Svarog's heart raced. He had no idea what the human would do. But then, to his surprise, the man simply smiled and waved. "Hey there, friend," the man called out. "You lost." Svarog stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The man was not frightened by his appearance. In fact, he seemed welcoming, friendly. It was a gesture Svarog had never experienced from any other species. He took a tentative step forward, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. This was a different kind of strength than what he had seen on the battlefield. It was not the strength of a soldier, but the strength of a people who had learned to live in harmony with their world. "I'm not lost," Svarog replied, his voice deep and steady. "I'm just new here." The man's smile widened. "Well, you've come to the right place. We're all new to this world in one way or another. You're welcome to stay and help if you need to." It was the first time in Svarog's life that he had ever been treated with such kindness by someone from another species. It was humbling, and in that moment he realized something profound. The humans he had seen in battle had not only fought for survival, but they had also fought for something greater. They fought for each other. They fought to protect what they loved. It was not about conquering or dominating. It was about living together. Svarog took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past lift slightly. He was no longer just a general of the Vragath Empire. He was something else now, something that was still taking shape. He wasn't sure where this journey would lead him, but one thing was certain. He had found something on Earth that he had never found in the stars. Something worth fighting for. The days after Svarog's crash landing on Earth were nothing like the battles he had fought in space. The humans he had encountered were kind, and their ways were so different from anything he had ever known. The older farmer, who introduced himself as John, had welcomed him into his small home, offering him food and shelter. Svarog, still unsure of how to proceed, accepted, though he remained distant and reserved. He had not expected this kind of hospitality from a species that he had once seen as inferior. Days passed, and Svarog observed the humans closely. The simplicity of their lives baffled him. They did not rely on advanced technology or vast empires like the Vragath. Instead, they worked the land with their hands, built homes with their own two hands, and lived in tight-knit communities where everyone contributed. Svarog marveled at how they seemed so at peace with themselves and each other. He saw little competition among them. There was no greed, no desire for power. They simply lived, worked, and cared for one another. The human world, despite its apparent simplicity, had an energy that Svarog could not quite grasp. He had always believed that the strong survive, and that strength was defined by power, by the ability to dominate others. The Vragath Empire had grown through conquest, and Svarog had always believed that was the only way to ensure survival. But here on Earth, the people seemed to thrive by something else, a deeper connection to each other and to the land. John had introduced Svarog to his family, his wife Mary and his two children, Ella and Lucas. They were kind, humble people, and Svarog found himself drawn to them in ways he couldn't explain. Despite the fact that they were all human and he was an alien, they treated him as though he were family. They didn't look at him with fear or suspicion. They simply accepted him. At first, Svarog kept his distance. He spent most of his time outside, watching the humans work. They didn't have the strength or advanced technology of the Vragath, but their work ethic and cooperation made them strong in ways Svarog had never seen before. He helped John in the fields one afternoon, planting crops and repairing fences. It was hard work, but it felt different than anything he had done in his previous life. It wasn't about control or power. It was about contributing, helping, and building something together. One evening, as they sat around a fire outside, John told Svarog a story about the human spirit. He spoke of times when humans faced great challenges, when they were pushed to the brink of extinction, but somehow they managed to survive. They fought not because they wanted to conquer others, but because they had something to protect: their families, their homes, their way of life. They fought for the right to live as they chose, without interference from others. "That's what makes us strong," John said as he looked into the fire. "We fight for each other, we fight for what's right, and no matter how hard it gets, we never give up." For the first time, Svarog felt something stir within him. He had been raised to believe that power was everything. That strength came from domination and fear. But here in front of him was a different kind of strength. A strength born not from fear, but from love, from unity, and from the determination to protect what mattered most. The more time Svarog spent with the humans, the more he began to realize that this was something the Vragath had never understood. They had conquered countless worlds, but they had never known what it truly meant to fight for something greater than themselves. The Vragath had fought for power, for control, but the humans fought for freedom, for the chance to live on their own terms. The next few days were spent working alongside the humans, repairing the house, planting more crops, and helping with small tasks around the farm. Svarog began to feel a strange sense of fulfillment. There was no glory in this work, no recognition. But for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with conquest or war. He was simply helping people, and that felt more meaningful than any battle he had ever fought. One evening, as they gathered for dinner, Svarog's thoughts drifted back to the Vragath. He had left his people, abandoning everything he had known to come to this strange world. But what was he really looking for? What had driven him to Earth in the first place? He realized that he had never truly understood what it meant to live. The Vragath had always lived with a sense of entitlement, believing that they were the superior species, that their way was the only way. But now, Svarog saw a different path, one where life was valued, where people fought not for domination, but for survival and freedom. The following day, something unexpected happened. As Svarog and John were working in the fields, a group of humans approached the farm. They were from a nearby village, and they were looking for help. The crops in their fields had failed due to a lack of rain, and they needed food and supplies to survive the coming winter. The situation was dire, and they were desperate. Without hesitation, John and Mary agreed to help. They gave what they could spare: food, blankets, and tools to help the other village. Svarog watched in awe as the family didn't hesitate to share what they had, even though they had little themselves. They did it because it was the right thing to do. It was a moment that left a deep impression on Svarog. He had seen countless battles in his life, but he had never seen something so powerful: the willingness to sacrifice for others, even in times of hardship. As the sun began to set, Svarog stood by the fire, contemplating everything he had learned. He was no longer the same being who had arrived on this planet just days ago. The more he saw of humanity, the more he began to understand that true strength was not about power or technology. It was about fighting for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. It was about protecting the ones you loved, even if it meant sacrificing everything. As the humans returned to their village, Svarog stood there, his mind racing with thoughts of his past and his future. He had come to Earth seeking answers, and now he found himself questioning everything he had known. The Vragath were powerful, but their power was empty. They had conquered and destroyed, but they had never truly known what it meant to live. The humans, on the other hand, had something that the Vragath could never take away: a connection to each other, to their world, and to the very essence of life itself. In that moment, Svarog made a decision. He would stay on Earth. He would learn from the humans, and he would protect them just as they had protected him. There was no going back to the Vragath now. He had found something far more valuable here, something that could not be measured in strength or technology. He had found humanity's true power. As the days passed, Svarog continued to live with John and his family. He worked hard alongside them in the fields, repairing the fences, tending to the crops, and doing everything he could to help. The work was not easy, but it felt fulfilling in a way he had never experienced before. It wasn't about strength or power. It wasn't about being a conqueror or a general. It was about working together, side by side, with the people who had accepted him as one of their own. But as much as Svarog had come to appreciate the peaceful life on Earth, a part of him could not escape the weight of his past. He had been a general in the Vragoth Empire, and he could never fully forget what he had been. The Vragoth would be looking for him. They would not let him escape so easily. Even though Earth seemed like a refuge, Svarog knew that the empire he had left behind would eventually come after him. And when they did, it would put everything and everyone he had come to care about in danger. His thoughts were often clouded with this fear, but he kept it to himself. He did not want to burden John or his family with the knowledge of his past. They had already shown him kindness and acceptance, and he did not want to bring them trouble. But as the weeks went on, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming, that his past was catching up with him. One evening, as Svarog sat by the fire watching the stars, John came to sit beside him. He could tell something was on Svarog's mind. "You've been quiet lately," John said, his voice warm but curious. "What's bothering you?" Svarog hesitated. He had not spoken much about his past, and he didn't want to start now. But John's kindness made it hard to keep everything inside. He felt a strange sense of trust building between them. After a long pause, Svarog spoke. "I come from a place far away from here," he began. "My people, they are not like you. We conquered worlds, destroyed civilizations. We believe in strength and power. That is how we rule. I was one of their generals. I led battles, I took lives, and I never questioned it." He paused, trying to find the right words. "But then I saw you, saw humans, and I realized that there is more to strength than power. I came here to understand what that means." John listened quietly, his eyes fixed on Svarog. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. "I don't know how to explain it," Svarog continued, his voice softer now. "But I feel like I've found something here, something I never had before. But I fear that it will be taken from me. My past will catch up with me, and when it does, it will put you and your family in danger." John nodded slowly, processing what Svarog had said. There was no fear in his eyes, no judgment, just understanding. "Is that why you've been so distant?" John asked. "You're afraid of what's coming." "Yes," Svarog replied. "I'm afraid that everything I've come to care about will be destroyed because of my past. The Vragoth will not just let me leave. They will come for me, and they will come for everyone I've come to know." John was quiet for a moment. Then he put a hand on Svarog's shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone," he said simply. "We'll fight for you. You've helped us, and we won't turn our backs on you now. We protect each other here. That's what family does." Svarog was taken aback by John's words. He had always been taught that strength came from isolation, that you had to stand alone in battle. But here, John was telling him something entirely different. That strength came from the people around you, from the bonds you shared. It was a concept that Svarog had never fully understood until now. "I don't deserve your protection," Svarog said, shaking his head. "You've already given me more than I could ever repay," John smiled. "No one's asking for repayment. Just be here, be part of our family. We'll figure it out together." It was then that Svarog realized that he had been wrong. He had spent his entire life believing that power came from dominance, from fighting alone and defeating enemies. But the true strength of humanity was something entirely different. It was the willingness to stand together, to protect those you loved, no matter the cost. It was the willingness to fight not for yourself, but for others. As the days went on, Svarog started to feel a sense of peace he had never known before. He had come to Earth seeking answers, and now he was finding them. He wasn't just learning about the strength of humanity. He was learning about himself, about what it meant to be truly alive. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. But even as he began to embrace this new life, Svarog could not escape the fear that still lingered in his mind. The Vragoth would eventually come, and when they did, they would destroy everything in their path. He had made his choice, but he knew that the consequences would be far-reaching. The inevitable day arrived sooner than he had expected. It began with a distant rumble in the sky, a low hum that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Svarog's heart sank as he looked up, knowing exactly what it was. He had been waiting for this moment, but that didn't make it any easier to face. The Vragoth fleet had arrived. The ships were massive, their sleek, dark forms cutting through the sky like shadows. Svarok had seen fleets like this before. They were not here for peace. They were here to reclaim what they had lost. John, Mary, and the children gathered around Svarok as the ships descended, their presence casting a dark shadow over the peaceful farm. "What do we do now?" John asked, his voice steady but with a hint of fear. Svarok took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had no idea how to fight the Vragoth. They were stronger, more advanced, and they would not hesitate to destroy everything in their path. But he had learned something from the humans. He had learned that strength wasn't just about power. It was about standing up for what was right, about fighting for those you cared about. He turned to John and his family. "Prepare yourselves," he said quietly. "We fight for each other. We fight for Earth." The battle was coming, and Svarok knew that it would be unlike anything he had ever faced before. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. This time, he had something worth fighting for. The first sign that the Vragoth had arrived was the sound. It wasn't just the roar of engines or the whine of powerful weapons systems. It was something deeper, something that rumbled through the ground and into the very core of Svarok's being. He had heard that sound many times before in battles across the galaxy. It was the sound of an empire coming to crush its enemies. The massive Vragoth ships hung in the sky like dark shadows, blocking out the sun. Their sleek black forms hovered ominously over the small farm, casting long, menacing shadows over the fields that had once seemed so peaceful. The humans below had never seen anything like it before. The air seemed to vibrate with the weight of the threat above them. Svarok stood tall, his hands clenched into fists. He could feel his heart pounding, but there was no fear in his chest. Instead, there was a deep sense of resolve. He had come to Earth seeking answers, and now he had found his purpose. He had found a family, and he would not let them be destroyed by the empire he had once served. John, Mary, and the children stood behind him, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They had never faced an enemy like the Vragoth. But they were ready to fight. They had nothing else to lose. "We need to get to the village," Svarok said, his voice steady but urgent. "We can't fight them here. It's too dangerous. We need to warn the others." John nodded, his expression hardening. "Let's go then. We'll stand with you no matter what." Together, they gathered their belongings and made their way through the fields. Svarok led the way, his eyes scanning the sky for any sign of movement. He knew the Vragoth would not wait long. They would land soon, and when they did, there would be no time left for escape. The humans would need to be ready. As they reached the village, they were met by the other villagers who had seen the ships in the sky. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone was gathered in the town square preparing for the inevitable battle. The villagers were frightened, but they were not willing to give up without a fight. They had families to protect. They had homes to defend. And they had something the Vragoth could never take away, their will to survive. Svarok looked around at the gathered villagers. They were just ordinary people, not soldiers, not warriors. They were farmers, shopkeepers, and families, but they were united. They had something the Vragoth didn't understand, a sense of community, a sense of belonging. They weren't fighting for power or control. They were fighting to protect each other. John stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "We don't have much, but we have each other. We have this land, and we have our will to survive. The Vragoth may be strong, but they don't know what it means to fight like we do." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. The people looked at each other, their faces set in grim determination. They had no choice but to fight, and in that moment Svarok felt something stir in his chest, pride. These humans who had so little were willing to stand and fight for everything they had. "It's time," Svarok said quietly. "We will make our stand here. We will fight for Earth." The villagers armed themselves with whatever they could find, farming tools, old hunting rifles, and anything else that could be used as a weapon. Svarok stood at the front, his mind racing with strategies. He knew the Vragoth would land soon, and when they did, they would bring overwhelming force. But he had something they didn't, the strength of human spirit. As the first Vragoth ships began to descend, the villagers stood their ground. Svarok could hear the engines grow louder, feel the ground shake beneath his feet. The ships landed with a thunderous crash, their doors opening to reveal the Vragoth soldiers, heavily armored, towering figures with weapons that could tear through anything in their path. The Vragoth soldiers stepped out, their eyes scanning the humans in front of them. Svarok stepped forward, his body tense but his heart steady. He was ready. One of the Vragoth commanders, a massive figure in dark armor, approached. His voice boomed out, cold and commanding. "Surrender now, human. This world is under the authority of the Vragoth Empire. Resistance is futile." Svarok's voice was calm, but his words rang out with a power that shocked even the Vragoth. "This world is not yours to take. These people will fight for what they love." "You cannot break them," the Vragoth commander sneered. "You speak as though you are one of them, traitor. You abandoned your empire, now you will suffer the consequences." Svarok's gaze did not waver. "I have no empire, I have a family, and I will protect them." With a swift movement, the Vragoth commander raised his weapon, and the battle began. The humans fought with everything they had. They may not have had advanced technology, but they had courage, determination, and a willingness to sacrifice for each other. Svarok fought alongside them, using his knowledge of Vragoth tactics to guide the villagers in their defense. He helped them set traps, create barricades, and outsmart the Vragoth at every turn. Despite the overwhelming power of the Vragoth soldiers, the humans held their ground. Svarok saw them working together in ways that no empire could ever replicate. They were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting for each other. They were fighting for their home. The battle raged on for hours, with both sides taking heavy losses. Svarok fought like he had never fought before. He used his skills as a soldier, but he also relied on something deeper, the strength of the humans around him. He saw it in the way they protected each other, in the way they never gave up, no matter how hopeless it seemed. As the sun began to set, the Vragoth forces started to retreat. They had underestimated the humans. They had thought they could easily crush them, but they had not counted on the one thing the Vragoth could never defeat, the will of a people united. With the Vragoth forces retreating, the villagers let out a cheer, but it was not a cheer of victory. It was a cheer of relief, a cheer of survival. They had fought and they had won. Svarok stood in the center of the battlefield, his body bruised and battered, but his heart full. He had learned what true strength meant. It wasn't about technology or power. It wasn't about conquering and destroying. It was about standing together, fighting for what mattered, and never giving up. John walked up to him, clapping him on the shoulder. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Svarok nodded. "No, you did it. I'm just glad I could help." As the night fell, the villagers began to clean up the battlefield. They mourned their lost friends and family members, but they also celebrated their survival. They had stood together, and they had defeated the might of the Vragoth Empire. Svarok stood by the fire, watching the humans work. For the first time in his life, he felt at peace. He had found his place. He had found his family, and he would protect them no matter what. The Vragoth had come to conquer, but they had failed. And Svarok had learned that there was no force stronger than the human spirit.